Have you ever been insulted? Or heard some petty rumor about yourself and felt that burning, desperate urge to defend yourself? To just set the record straight? Well, welcome to this deep dive explainer, because today we're going to explore exactly why that instinct to protect your ego is actually a fatal trap. We're unpacking the profound psychology behind Law 36, and you'll see why your attention is literally your most valuable and potentially dangerous resource. Consider this a masterclass in power dynamics. Let's get right into it. Okay, so let's dive into this with a fascinating paradox that totally challenges everything we think we know about problem solving. From a young age, we're taught to face our problems head on, right? But in the realm of social dynamics, doing that is often a massive mistake. Think about it. The exact moment you engage with a minor annoyance or some petty rival, you inadvertently validate them. By giving them your attention, you're signaling to everyone that they are worthy of your time, and that instantly elevates their status while simultaneously lowering yours. You are stepping right onto their playing field. And this brings us to the core judgment of this text, which brilliantly illustrates that by acknowledging a petty problem, you actually give it existence and credibility. It's like the less interest you reveal, the more superior you seem. I want you to think of it like this. Your attention is a spotlight. When you shine it on someone who's attacking you, whether that's in a corporate meeting or a social media thread, you aren't just defending yourself, you are literally illuminating them for the whole world to see. Which leads us to part 1, the paradox of attention and giving life to problems. Let's start by looking at attention not as a feeling, but as an economic resource that you spend. When you're ambitious, everyone wants a piece of your attention. It's a currency. And if you give it away to every single critic, well, you'll bankrupt yourself. The author pairs this economic reality with this really powerful medical metaphor of a tiny wound. We all know that picking at a scab only makes it worse, right? Whereas leaving it alone lets it heal. If you apply a dozen ointments and constantly touch a small scrape, you're going to cause an infection. The remedy itself becomes the cause of the disease. Socially and professionally, the exact same principle applies. The crucial takeaway here is that your reaction is the very oxygen that keeps your adversaries alive. The more attention you pay an enemy, the stronger you make him. If someone tries to bait you into an argument, you have to understand their psychology. They crave your emotional dysregulation. By getting angry, you are handing them the remote control to your emotions. Your desperate attempt to set the record straight, that's exactly what they want, because it proves they have power over you. All right, let's move to section 2, the Pancho Villa blunder and Woodrow Wilson's humiliation. To really see what happens when you give away this oxygen, let's examine the disastrous historical misstep of President Woodrow Wilson. Back in 1916, the Mexican rebel Pancho Villa raided a U.S. town. Now, strategically speaking, Villa was just a fading bandit acting out of sheer desperation. But President Wilson's advisors absolutely panicked about public perception. Their fear of looking weak forced them into a reaction that actually made them look vastly weaker. What started as this minor punitive mission with 10,000 troops absurdly escalated to over 120,000 men. And by January 1917, the U.S. Army had to humiliate itself by withdrawing completely empty-handed. To put that colossal failure into perspective, Wilson blew $130 million, marching troops through mosquito-infested heat, and gained absolutely nothing. That number is staggering, especially for the time. It was essentially a massive financial tax levied directly on Wilson's bruised ego. He entangled a massive world power in a totally futile game, and the longer it dragged on, the more foolish the United States looked. By trying to crush an insect with a sledgehammer, Wilson actually elevated Pancho Villa from a fading bandit back into a legendary folk hero. Villa himself noted that they had nothing but the sun and mosquitoes, and nothing was gained. The massive imbalance between the pursuer and the pursued made the whole affair a global joke. Wilson should have just ignored him publicly, maybe organized a covert intelligence operation quietly in the background, but instead, his loud, highly public reaction created a legend out of a minor thief. So, what's the alternative? Let's look at section 3. Henry VIII's royal disdain and the ultimate power pose. Here we'll see how a completely different strategy leads to ultimate power. Back in the 1520s, King Henry VIII desperately wanted an annulment from Catherine of Aragon. Pope Clement VII refused, and he used these stalling tactics to slowly wear Henry down. But Henry, he didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He simply withdrew his attention. He shipped Catherine off to a distant castle, and when the Pope threatened excommunication, which, remember, was essentially a social and spiritual death sentence at the time, Henry just ignored him. He broke from the church entirely. It was a staggering display of psychological dominance. The psychology at play here is just fascinating. By completely ignoring the Pope, Henry dictated the terms of the conflict and left his enemy floundering.
You see, interactions are dynamic. They require two people moving in step. By holding back your reaction, you completely cut off that dynamic. The Pope tried literally every threat in the book, but because Henry refused to even acknowledge them, the Pope was left with zero power and no recourse. By ignoring people, you cancel them out.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 4, the psychology of contempt and the economics of attention. Now, contempt isn't about throwing a tantrum. True strategic contempt is a cold withdrawal of interaction. It's the prerogative of the king. King Louis XIV was an absolute master of this. If he didn't like you, his eyes would simply pass over you as if you didn't even exist, completely denying your reality. Think about how this applies today in a modern corporate meeting. If a petty detractor attacks your idea, aggressively arguing with them just makes you look defensive and insecure. But looking at them blankly, pausing for a second, and then calmly moving on to the next topic, that completely strips their power. While Louis XIV mastered this contempt, Richard Nixon was destroyed by his lack of it. Displaying uncontrollable desire or paranoia makes you look weak. For instance, when the Pentagon Papers leaked, they weren't actually a fatal threat to Nixon. They were mostly about previous administrations. But Nixon's volcanic paranoia and his total inability to ignore the leak led him to create a group called the Plumbers, and they eventually broke into the Watergate Hotel, sparking the very scandal that destroyed his presidency. His attempt to fix a minor leak literally created the instrument of his own downfall.
Which takes us to Section 5, the art of sour grapes and mastering the deflection.
But what if you are the one who gets rejected or makes a mistake? Well, we can actually learn from the ancient fable of the fox who couldn't jump high enough to reach some juicy grapes. Instead of admitting defeat, he just walked away saying, well, they're probably sour anyway. Now, we usually think of crying sour grapes as a petty defense mechanism, but it's actually a really clever tactic of the powerful. It works because it changes the frame. You aren't the victim who was denied a prize. You're the judge who evaluated the prize and found it lacking. A brilliant historical example of this is the writer George Sand. In 1861, she was denied entry to the exclusive Académie Française simply because she was a woman. Now, she didn't write some long essay detailing her hurt. Instead, she used humor and mockery, branding them a club of worn-out old windbags. Anger shows that you care. Mockery shows you are above it all. She made it seem like it was her choice not to associate with them, projecting total superiority.
Similarly, if you make a blunder, over-apologizing gives the other person all the power. A courtier once smashed Japanese Emperor Go-Science's priceless antique tea-bowl. The emperor was absolutely furious, but the courtiers simply bowed and mildly noted that it was amazing the old thing lasted this long anyway. By treating his own massive mistakes so lightly, he forced the emperor to either mirror his aristocratic indifference or risk looking incredibly petty. In modern PR or leadership, this is exactly why issuing a sweaty 10-page apology over a minor verbal gaffe just fuels the media fire, while brushing it off with a self-deprecating chuckle kills the story in a single day.
But we have to talk about the flip side. Section 6, the danger of ignoring and the reversal.
Because, as with all strategies, ignoring the wrong thing can be absolutely fatal. You must develop the surgical skill to explicitly distinguish between a petty nuisance and a true threat. A nuisance makes a lot of noise but has no underlying capability, kind of like Pancho Villa. A true threat might be quiet but possesses immense ambition, competence, and resources. During the Renaissance, the great princes of Italy treated a young Caesar Borgia as a nuisance. They just ignored him. And by the time they realized he was actually highly capable, the cub had grown into a lion that devoured their territories. The ultimate lesson here, as the philosopher Baltasar Gracian noted, is that things can easily be settled at the outset, but not later on. You must never take your eye completely off a problem. The true master of power understands this duality. You maintain sharp vigilance privately, secretly monitoring the status of a threat to ensure it goes away, even while you publicly project total, unflappable ignorance. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to apply to your own life today. Look closely at your own conflicts. What troll in your comments, what passive-aggressive coworker, or what minor past mistake are you accidentally empowering right now simply by paying attention to it? Remember, your attention is your power. Stop giving it away for free.